My mother tried sleeping pills when I was 3, and pesticide when I was 5. By 12, I finally learned why she hated me. I was the child of the man who assaulted her. I stopped fighting back and decided to give her the only birthday gift she had ever truly wanted, my death. When I asked how she would feel if I died, she told me to hurry and promised she would celebrate. By the time I managed to limp to Granny's house, night had already fallen. Granny saw the mess I was in and didn't look surprised. She took out her first aid kit and treated my injuries, like she always did, then made me a simple plate of carbonara. Usually I would eat while swearing I'd get even the next day. But this time I just stared at the food and quietly asked Annie, "I'm not actually Dad's child, am I?" She didn't answer, but the rejection and disgust flickering in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She stood abruptly and started wiping the table over and over, right where the first aid kit had been. That was when I realized that my blood was something they all wanted to stay away from. I was the son of a rapist.
No wonder Mom hated me.
A sick canning feeling rose in my throat. I bolted outside and leaned against the fence, retching. The night air stung the scrapes on my face. Before, whenever Mom hit me, I told myself she owed me for every bruise she'd inflicted on me. One day I'd make her pay them back. But now I didn't think I could even look her in the eye. I didn't stay at Granny's. She didn't come after me either. Instead, I wandered the streets with no idea where to go. That was when I saw a family outside a restaurant. They were celebrating someone's birthday, smiling and laughing. The woman in the middle was probably the mother. She looked so happy that I instinctively took a step back. Last year on Mom's birthday, she'd smiled just like that before she saw me. The moment she saw me walk in, her smile vanished, replaced with utter disgust. Back then, we had an essay with the theme My Mother. I wrote that Mom was a heartless villain. My teacher dragged me into her office and lectured me for an entire period. I barely heard most of it. I only remembered her saying, no mother in this world would ever stop loving her child. I believed her. I saved money from collecting recyclables and bought my mom a birthday cake. I just wanted a hug, the same kind she gave my brother, Casper Willis. But her frigid expression was like a stab in the heart. I felt like a fool standing there with that cake in my hands. Anger overwhelmed me. When no one was looking, I went out and caught a couple of frogs in the garden. Then I hid them in the cake. I could still remember the way she screamed when they jumped out. Back then, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I thought she didn't deserve to be a mother. I thought she had it coming. But now I know the truth. The one who didn't deserve anything was me. My existence itself had hurt her. As I watched that mother smile through the restaurant window, I made a decision. This year for Mom's birthday, I would give her a gift she would truly be happy with, one that would free her completely. I decided to die. Once that thought took root in my mind, my steps felt lighter. I even started planning how to do it without troubling anyone. I needed to do something that wouldn't leave a mess. But before I could carry out my plan, a patrolling officer spotted me and brought me home. Mom answered the door. As the door shut behind us, I stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Her icy tone sliced through the air. Why didn't you just die out there? I almost snapped back. I forced the words down before they came out. Still, as I stared at her back, I couldn't stop myself from asking, what would you do if I really did die? Would she be the least bit sad? If you've got the guts, hurry up and do it.
Ides a la brata.
She walked straight into my sibling's room and closed the door. I stood rooted to my spot in the living room. After a long while, I wiped my face and let out a humorless laugh. Mom would definitely like the birthday present I had prepared. My little brother overheard part of a conversation and screamed that I planned to hurt Mom. She beat me until the broom slipped from her hands. That night, Granny finally told me what had happened when Mom was 19, how neither of them had wanted me, and how the police had forced them to take me back. Later, I lay awake while Mom pressed a pillow over my face. I did not struggle. The night, she pressed a pillow over my face. She didn't know I was awake. Her hands were shaking, but I didn't struggle. I just closed my eyes and waited. Just as my lungs were burning, someone yanked Mom off me with tremendous force. Granny's voice was hoarse and shaking. Have you lost your mind? Are you really going to throw your life away again because of him? It's not worth it. Once was enough. Mom collapsed into her arms and let out a broken sob. Mom, I can't take it anymore. What if he turns out just as bad as his father? Granny held her tightly, but her eyes shifted toward me. For a moment, I thought she saw that my eyes were half open, but she only whispered calmly, let's go back to bed. Mom's crying faded into the distance. I lay there gasping for air, then pulled the blanket over my face and rolled onto my side. I had no idea how long it was before John started to break. That was when Granny walked in carrying a large enamel cup. It was filled with steaming mushroom soup. Drinking mushroom soup first thing in the morning was strange, but she simply set the cup on my nightstand and said, her voice is steady as the deep lines on her face shrink. I understood what she meant. I almost wanted to tell her. They were in such a hurry. If they had waited a few more days, I would have died without anyone noticing. Now, if I died, they would have a lot more trouble to deal with. I said nothing and picked up the cup. The heat stinging my hands, I tilted my head back and swallowed every drop. The strange bitterness spread from my tongue all the way to my chest. It was empty. I set it back on the nightstand, lay down again, pulled the blanket over myself, and waited for the end to come. Granny picked up the empty cup. She stood there for a few seconds, said nothing, and walked out. The effects came quickly. Pain twisted through my stomach, followed by a cold that spread across my body, until my teeth were chattering. My vision blurred and sounds grew distant. I heard Granny pacing back and forth. It seemed like she was making a phone call. Then came the blaring siren of an ambulance. Hurried voices, harsh lights. Under the white glare of the hospital lamps, a tube was forced down my throat so they could pump my stomach. I gagged until my chest felt like it was tearing open. Tears and gas were smeared all over my face. A young doctor glanced at me, then at Granny's ashen face, his brows deeply furrowed. What happened? Is there something wrong with the... He lowered his voice, suspicion creeping in. With the last bit of strength I had left, I clutched at his sleeve. My voice came out rough and barely audible. It was me. I took the medicine myself. He froze. His eyes shifted toward me with something complicated behind them. I let go, collapsed against the bed, and stared up at the ceiling. Being hard to kill might be its own kind of curse. Even dying felt out of reach for me. Granny stood by the bed, her back hunched, her gray hair brushing against her cheeks. Before I closed my eyes, I thought I saw a tear slide down her face and drop onto the floor. After I was discharged, home felt like a frozen grave. The walls were still white. The furniture was still neat, but everyone in the house looked drained, as if someone had taken all the life out of them. I became more obedient than ever. I ate quietly, went to and from school quietly, and worked quietly. I turned myself into a silent shadow, trying not to take up any space. Even started disciplining Casper. Be good. Don't make Mom angry, I told him, wiping the crumbs from his mouth. With a rare calmness, he looked up at me confused, but there was a hint of reliance in his eyes. As for my baby sister, Janet Willis, Mom guarded her like I was a thief. I still found a way to sneak into town, to go to the church that people claimed was miraculous. I only had a couple of dollars in my pocket, but I spent them all and bought a Lucky Charm. When Mom was spacing out in the kitchen during Janet's afternoon nap, I slipped in like a ghost and tucked the charm into the corner of Janet's blanket. I hoped she would grow up safe. Then I decided to leave. I was a coward. If I wasn't going to die, then disappearing would have to do. No goodbyes were needed. It was a sweltering summer afternoon. The sun beat down so hard it made me dizzy. I walked aimlessly along the dusty path by the reservoir. Then a sharp, panicked scream echoed Connor. I left without saying goodbye and walked beside the reservoir, under the crushing summer sun. Then someone screamed my name. I turned and saw my little brother, Casper, lose his footing and plunge into the deep, murky water. Mom had spent my whole life fearing I would become the monster who created me. Now her beloved son was drowning, and I was the only person close enough to save him. The sound of the splash was heavy and flat, like a sack of wet flour hitting the reservoir's murky face. For a second, the heat seemed to freeze the world in place. The cicadas in the dry scrub oak along the bank stopped their relentless buzzing. The sun blazed down on the back of my neck, hot enough to raise blisters on my scraped skin. Connor. It was Casper's voice, high, thin, and instantly swallowed by the water. I stood on the baked dirt path, my worn sneakers inches from the drop-off. The reservoir wasn't a lake. It was an old quarry filled with decades of runoff, cold groundwater, and sunken rusted machinery. Everyone in town knew you didn't swim here. The edges dropped straight down into 20 feet of brown, sunless quiet. My mind didn't jump to heroic thoughts. It didn't flash with pictures of my little brother's smile or memories of wiping breadcrumbs from his mouth. Instead, a cold, terrifyingly clear thought washed over me. If he dies, she will blame me anyway. If Casper drowned and I survived, Mom wouldn't just hate me. She would see the final Undeniable proof that the blood in my veins was poison.
She would look at
Me, and see the monster who stood by and let her pure, loved child sink into the
dark.
and if I jumped in, I might die. The very thing she had asked for.
The
Birthday present she had waited 12 years to receive. My feet moved before I could weigh the dark math of it. I hit the water hard. The cold struck me like a physical blow, knocking the air straight out of my lungs that were still burning from the pillow 3 nights ago, still tender from the stomach tube that had scraped my throat raw. The dark water closed over my head, tasting of iron, algae, and ancient mud. When I surfaced, gasping, Casper was flailing 10 yards out. His head kept disappearing under the water, his arms churning the brown surface into gray foam. Casper, I yelled, but my voice was torn apart by my ragged breath. I kicked out, forcing my legs to move through the thick, heavy water. Every stroke felt like dragging lead weights. My body was malnourished, exhausted, broken down by months of hatred and days of poison. But I kept reaching forward, tearing through the cold depth. When I reached him, Casper didn't act like a brother. He acted like a drowning animal. He seized my shirt, his fingers locking into the cheap cotton with a terrifying, wild strength, dragging me down under his weight. We sank together into the sunless cold. Darkness pressed against my eyes. Bubbles flared out of my nose. Down here, beneath the glare of the summer sun, it was completely silent. I could feel the instinct to fight him off, to kick him away, and save myself. That was what his blood would do, wasn't it? The man who took whatever he wanted, who didn't care, who suffered or bled. No, I thought, the water roaring in my ears.
no.
I wrapped my arms around Casper's waist from behind, locking him against my chest so his flailing hands couldn't strangle me. I planted my feet against the slippery, weed-choked slope of the submerged rock shelf and shoved off with every ounce of strength left in my legs. We broke the surface violently. Air rushed into my mouth, sharp and sweet. Hold on to me. I barked into his ear, coughing up bitter reservoir water. Don't fight me, Casper. Look at the bank. He choked out a sob, his small body shivering violently against mine despite the brutal afternoon heat. I kicked back toward the steep embankment. The roots of a wild willow tree hung down into the water near the edge, like gray ropes. I reached out, my fingers barely catching a clump of exposed roots. The current tried to pull us back, but I dug my nails into the dirt beneath the wood. Climb. I wheezed, my chest heaving so hard it felt like my ribs were going to crack. Grab the root, Casper.
Get up.
I can't, Connor, I can't. You can, I yelled, forcing my shoulder under his boots and hoisting him upward. With a desperate, gut-wrenching heave. Climb. Casper scrambled up the muddy slope, his small hands clutching at the weeds, until he dragged his body onto the flat grass above. He lay there, retching and sobbing, safe. I tried to pull myself up after him. I raised my arm, but my muscles simply refused to obey. The cold of the reservoir had settled deep into my bones, mingling with the lingering weakness. From Granny's enamel cup, my lungs gave out. A wet, violent cough shook my body, loosening my grip on the willow root. My fingers slipped. The brown water swept over my face again. I didn't scream. I didn't even fight. I felt the slow, heavy drag of the deep quarry pulling me down into its shadows. Through the undulating surface, the sky looked like a cracked sheet of blue
Glass.
This is fine, I thought, letting my eyes drift shut. It's clean this way.
No.
Blood on the carpet. No mess for Granny to wipe down. Then, through the wall of water, a sound pierced the silence, a long, ragged, shattered scream from the bank above. It wasn't Casper. It was Mom. The world returned in fragments of light and pain. First came the smell, harsh bleach, rubbing alcohol, and the stale, warm scent of old blankets. Then came the sound, the rhythmic, mechanical beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor, hollow and steady. I tried to turn my head, but a dull, throbbing ache burned at the base of my
skull.
A clear plastic mask was strapped over my nose and mouth, pushing damp, medicinal oxygen into my chest with every shallow breath. He's moving. The voice was quiet, worn down to the bone. Granny. I forced my eyelids open. The fluorescent ceiling lights burned my retinas, forcing me to squint. I was in a hospital room again. The same pale blue walls, the same beige linoleum floor. It felt like I had never left. Granny sat in a vinyl armchair by the window, her hands folded tightly over a worn leather purse on her lap. She looked smaller than she had 3 days ago. Her spine bowed like an old orchard branch under heavy snow. And standing near the foot of the bed, shadowed by the privacy curtain, was Mom. She wasn't looking at me. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her fingers digging into the denim of her jacket, so hard her knuckles were yellow. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her face was hollowed out, dark. Purple smudges bruised beneath her eyes. I pulled off the oxygen mask with a trembling hand. The plastic clattered against the metal bedrail. The noise made Mom flinch. Her eyes snapped to mine, not with the sharp, icy disgust I had known every day of my life, but with something fractured, raw, and utterly terrified. Why? My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. My voice was nothing more than a dry croak. Why am I here? Granny let out a long, ragged sigh that sounded almost like a groan. She stood up slowly, her knees popping in the quiet room, and walked over to the side of
The bed.
a man walking his dog heard the screaming. Granny said quietly. He ran down with a rope. He pulled you out before you hit the bottom. I stared at the ceiling tiles. A bitter, empty laugh wanted to crawl out of my throat, but I didn't have the breath for it. I tried. I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. I tried to give you what you wanted. Why does it keep failing? The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Mom let out a strange, choked gasp. She turned her face toward the window, her shoulders shaking violently. Casper told us, Granny murmured, her voice steady, but thick with an emotion I couldn't quite read. He told us how you pushed him up onto the bank.
How you
Used your own body to lift him out. I didn't want him to drown, I said simply, looking over at Mom's rigid back. He's your real son. He deserves to live. Mom whirled around. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to hit me. I instinctively flinched, bracing my bruised body for the impact, closing my eyes. The hit never came. Instead, I heard the heavy thud of someone falling to their knees on the thin hospital linoleum. I opened my eyes. Mom was on her knees beside my bed, her forehead pressed hard against the metal frame. Her fingers clutched the rough white hospital sheet, her knuckles white. She didn't scream, and she didn't curse. She just sobbed, a deep, agonizing sound that tore out of her throat like she was choking on broken
glass.
Stop it, I whispered, uncomfortable, confused, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Mom, stop.
Don't do that.
I looked for him. She gasped out through her tears, her voice broken and unrecognizable. When I ran down to the path, I saw Casper sitting in the mud, and I thought you had pushed him. She raised her head. Her face was flushed, wet with tears and dirt from the reservoir path, her eyes wild with a pain that had nothing to do with physical
Wounds.
I ran down there screaming at you, she choked out. I was going to kill you with my bare hands if you had hurt him. And then Casper screamed that you were under the water, that you saved him. She buried her face back in the mattress, her body racked with heavy, uncontrollable tremors. You saved him, she wept. Why did you save him? You hate me. I know you hate me. I looked at her, at the gray hairs peeking out near her temples, at the thin, fragile frame of the woman who had spent 12 years making my life an endless, silent hell. I don't hate you, I said softly, the truth settling over me with a strange, numb weight. I just wanted you to stop hurting. She let out a sound that wasn't human, a wail of pure, unadulterated shame that echoed down the quiet hospital corridor. Granny walked over, placed a hand on Mom's trembling shoulder, and looked down
At me.
For the first time in my life, there was no disgust in Granny's eyes. There was no pity either. There was only an overwhelming, crushing sorrow. She was 19, Connor, Granny whispered, her voice rough. She was just a girl when he took her into that alley behind the grocery store. She was 19, and she lost her mind that night. When you were born, every time you cried, every time you looked at her, she didn't see a baby. She saw him. I know, I said. I know. No, you don't know, Granny said, a single tear finally slipping down the deep crevices of her cheek. Because I let her do it. I let her hate you, because I was afraid she would kill herself if she didn't have somewhere to put all that dark water inside her. I fed you that soup because I thought if you died, the curse would leave this house. I thought I was protecting her. Granny bowed her head, her hand trembling on Mom's shoulder. I was the monster, Granny whispered. Not your father.
Not you. Me.
I lay there in the sterile white light, listening to the two women who were supposed to protect me, listening to them shatter under the weight of their own sins. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would feel that twisted satisfaction I felt when the frogs jumped out of the birthday cake. But I felt nothing. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. "I'm not going to die for you," I said softly into the quiet room. Mom's sobbing hitched. She slowly raised her head, looking up at me through a blur of tears. "And I'm not going to stay here to make you remember," I continued, my voice growing steadier with every word.
I'm 12.
"I can work. I can leave." "Connor." Mom reached out a trembling, timid hand toward my arm, but stopped herself an inch away, as if afraid her touch would burn me. "Connor, please." "You don't have to pretend," I told her, looking straight into her tear-streaked
Eyes.
"You don't have to try to love me now just because I didn't like Casper.
D.
You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you my life." She covered her mouth with both hands, shaking her head frantically, but no words came out. I turned my head away from them both, staring back at the white ceiling. "I want to rest now," I said. "They tried to change things when I got back from the hospital. The house was different, but it was worse. The cold, sharp hostility had been replaced by an suffocating, agonizing caution." Mom wouldn't look at me directly, but she left clean clothes on my bed every morning, new shirts she had bought from the department store, not the hand-me-downs from garage sales. She made hot meals and set the largest portion in front of my chair. When I walked into a room, she would stiffen her hands, trembling, looking at me like I was a fragile glass vase that she had already dropped and shattered. Granny didn't talk much anymore. She sat on the porch in her rocking chair, staring out at the gravel driveway with hollow, distant eyes, her hands lying idle in her lap. Casper came into my room 3 weeks after the reservoir. It was late at night. The summer heat was finally breaking, replaced by the cool, damp chill of early autumn. He dragged his small blanket across the floor, his eyes wide and uncertain in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "Connor," he whispered, standing by the edge of my narrow mattress. I sat up slowly. "What's wrong? Is Janet crying?" "No," he said, swallowing hard. He shuffled his feet. "Can I sleep here?" I looked at him. He was 6 years old, small and innocent, completely unaware of the dark shadow that hung over the bloodline of this house. He didn't know about the alleyway or the police court orders, or the enamel cup of mushroom soup. All he knew was that his big brother had pulled him out of the dark water. I moved over, making room on the narrow twin bed. "Get in." He scrambled up under the covers, curling into a tight ball against my side.
He
Was warm, smelling of baby shampoo and soap. "Mom cried in the bathroom today," Casper whispered into the dark. She held your old baby picture, the one where you're wearing the blue hat. "Go to sleep, Casper," I said quietly. "Are you going to go away?" he asked, his voice wavering. "I heard Granny say you were going to leave when you get older." I looked at the peeling wallpaper above my bed.
Not yet, I said.
"Not until you're big enough to take care of Janet." He sighed, a small, contented sound, and within 10 minutes, his breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. I lay awake, listening to the house settle, listening to the floorboards creak, as Mom paced the hallway outside my door, too terrified to come in, too tormented to go to sleep. I didn't leave that night or the next year. I understood that leaving as a rundown 12-year-old child meant ending up in foster care or on the street, dragged right back by the same police who had forced them to take me when I was a baby. If I was going to disappear, I had to do it properly. I had to build a life that belonged entirely to me, one that had no trace of my father's blood or my mother's scars. I spent the next 6 years living like a ghost in my own home. I went to school. I didn't make friends, and I didn't draw attention to myself. When teachers asked questions, I answered in short, polite sentences. When the bell rang, I left immediately. After school, I worked. First, it was yard work for the elderly neighbors down the road. Then, when I turned 14, I got a job sweeping floors and hauling heavy sacks of feed at the local farm supply store. I took every shift they offered. I worked weekends, holidays, and summer breaks. Every cent I earned, I took to a bank 2 towns over, opening a private account that no one in my house knew about. Mom never tried to hit me again. She never spoke a harsh word to me. But the distance between us was wider than the reservoir. We were like 2 survivors of a terrible explosion, forced to live in the wreckage together, unable to look at each other's burn marks. On my 18th birthday, I came home from the feed store at 7 in the evening. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken and sweet corn. Mom was sitting at the table. In the center of the wood was a small, store-bought chocolate cake with a single yellow candle sticking out of the frosting. She stood up quickly when I walked in, her hands fluttering nervously against her apron. "Connor," she said, her voice faint. "Happy birthday." It was the first time she had ever said those words to me. I stood in the doorway, my boots dusty from the farm supply yard, holding my canvas backpack over one shoulder. Casper, now 12, was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching me quietly. Janet, 6 years old, was drawing with crayons on the floor, wearing the small silver Lucky Charm I had tucked into her blanket years ago around her neck. Granny wasn't there. She had passed away in her sleep 2 winters ago, taking her guilt and her secret cups of soup to the grave. I looked at the cake. I remembered the frogs. I remembered the ice in her eyes. When I was 12, I remembered the pillow pressed over my face, stopping the air in my lungs. "Thank you," I said softly. I walked to the table, but I didn't sit down. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out an envelope, and set it beside the cake. Mom looked down at the paper. "What's this?" "It's the money for the feed store job," I said. "And the rent for the room for the last 6 months. There's $3,000 in there. It should cover the roof repair Granny never finished." Her face went pale. The hands on her apron gripped the fabric so hard it tore at the seam. "Connor, no. I don't want your money. It's not a gift," I said calmly. "It's a payment. Now we're even. You fed me, gave me a roof, and kept the police off your back. I paid you back for every plate of food and every shirt. Please," she choked out, tears instantly brimming in her eyes, trailing down the deep lines that time and grief had carved into her face. "Don't do this."
I
"Know what I did. I know I was terrible, but please, Connor, stay for dinner. Just one meal." I looked at her, really looked at her. The terror that used to paralyze me when she walked into the room was completely
gone.
The burning, twisted anger that made me hide frogs in a birthday cake hat burned down to cold ashes. Looking at her now, I didn't see a villain or a heartless monster. I just saw a broken, traumatized girl who had spent 28 years living in a prison of her own making, unable to escape the memory of a horrific night in an alley. And I realized something else. I was free. I wasn't his child. I wasn't her curse. I was just myself. "I can't, Mom," I said gently. It was the first time I had called her Mom, without bitterness or sarcasm in 6 years. "If I stay here, neither of us will ever heal. You'll look at me and remember him. And I'll look at you and remember the pillow." She closed her eyes, a low, broken sob escaping her lips.
She didn't argue. She
Knew it was the truth. I turned to Casper. He stood up from the couch, his eyes shining with tears. But he didn't try to stop me. He was 12 now, the same age I was when I jumped into the reservoir. He was strong, kind, and loved. "Take care of Janet," I told him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I will, Connor," he said, his voice cracking. "Where are you going?" "Far enough to see what the rest of the world looks like," I said. I picked up my canvas bag, turned around, and walked toward the front door. "Connor." I stopped, my hand on the cold brass doorknob. Mom was standing by the table, her head bowed, her tear-soaked face turned toward the floor. Did you ever hate me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked back at the small yellow candle flicker on the chocolate cake, burning quietly in the dark kitchen. "I used to," I said. "But I don't anymore. I hope you find a way to forgive yourself, Mom, because I already have." I opened the door, stepped out into the crisp, cool night air, and didn't look back. 10 years later, the city of Seattle was gray and rainy, the autumn mist falling softly over the docks where I worked as a head marine mechanic. It was hard, honest work, grease under my fingernails, heavy steel wrenches, the sharp scent of diesel oil and salt water. I had built a simple life. A modest 2-bedroom house near the water, a dog named Rust, and a heart that no longer pounded when a door slammed too
loud.
I had never returned to that small town by the reservoir. I kept in touch with Casper through letters and later, short phone calls.
He
had gone to college, become a teacher, and married a quiet girl from 2 counties over. Janet was 19 now, studying art in Chicago. Neither of them carried the poison. The cycle had stopped with me. On an early October afternoon, as the rain drummed steadily against the metal roof of the boat hangar, a young man in a heavy raincoat walked through the open
Bay doors.
I was wiping oil off my hands with a red rag. I stopped, watching him approach. He had grown tall, his shoulders broad, his hair cut neat and short.
But the
Sharp, kind eyes were unmistakable. Casper, I said, setting the rag down. He smiled, a real, warm smile, and walked over, pulling me into a quick, firm embrace. We hit each other on the back, two grown men standing among the stripped-down diesel engines and cold metal hulls. You look good, Connor, Casper said, stepping back and taking in the garage. You look like you belong here. I do, I said. What brings you all the way out to the coast? You didn't tell me you were coming. Casper's smile faded slightly, replaced by a quiet, solemn look. He reached into his heavy coat pocket and pulled out a small, flat wooden box bound with a simple leather strap. She passed away last Tuesday, Connor, Casper said softly. Quietly, in her sleep, her heart just gave out. The rain rattled against the corrugated steel roof above us. I stood there, the cool sea breeze drifting through the open bay doors, washing over my face.
Mom.
I didn't break down. I didn't feel a sudden surge of grief or relief. Just a deep, profound stillness, like a long, violent storm finally running out of wind. Over an open ocean. Was she in pain? I asked. No. Casper shook his head. She was peaceful at the end. Janet and I were with her. He stepped forward and held out the wooden box. She left this for you, Casper said. She made me promise to deliver it to you. Myself. She said you were the only one who had the right to open
It.
I took the box. The wood was smooth, dark mahogany, cool to the touch. Casper clapped me on the shoulder, giving me a moment of space, and walked toward the bay doors to look out at the gray, rain-swept harbor. I sat down on an overturned oil drum, the box resting on my knees. I undone the leather strap and lifted the wooden lid. Inside, there were no letters, no long explanations, and no desperate pleas for forgiveness. There were only 3 items. The first was a small, faded photograph taken 30 years ago. In it, a 19-year-old girl with dark, exhausted eyes sat on a hospital bed, holding a tiny swaddled baby. She wasn't smiling in the photo, but her arms were wrapped tightly around the bundle, holding it close to her chest as if trying to shield it from the world. On the back, written in faint, trembling blue ink, were 4 words. The day you saved me. The second item was a small, handmade coupon, yellowed with age, written in childish, uneven handwriting, good for 1 hug from Connor. It was the birthday gift I had made for her when I was 8 years old, the one she had swept off the counter into the trash. She had fished it out. She had kept it for 22 years. And the third item was a simple silver key attached to a small tag with an address written on it, a plot in the town cemetery, right beside Granny's. Attached to the key was a tiny note, written in her handwriting just weeks before she died. Connor, you gave me my life back twice, once when you were born and proved that grace could come from darkness, and once when you saved Casper and proved that blood is just water, but love is a choice. I spent my life terrified of the monster who hurt me. I was too blind to see that God had given me a hero. Instead, you don't have to come to the funeral. You don't owe me your tears. Just live a long, beautiful life. That is the only birthday gift I ever truly wanted. I held the note in my hands for a long time, watching the heavy drops of rainwater roll down the edge of the hangar roof, splashing into the harbor.
Below.
Connor? Casper called softly from the doorway, turning back to look at me. Are you all right? I carefully folded the note, placed it back into the wooden box, and closed the lid. I stood up, setting the box safely on my workbench beside my tools. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool, clean air fill my lungs completely. No pain, no smoke, no bitter taste of poison. Yeah, Casper, I said, picking up my jacket and putting it on.
I'm all right.
Let me lock up the shop. I'll buy us dinner. We walked out into the rain together, 2 brothers side by side, leaving the dark water behind for good.